Point of order.
I would like to seek two clarifications from you.
Number one.
With respect to a status update on Twitter documents and at some point in today's meeting,
Okay.
but also with respect to how do you decide who gets recognized in this committee? I have had my hand raised on multiple occasions, and I know that I've been the first person to have raised my hand on meeting after meeting after meeting, and yet you don't recognize me. I'm just wondering, can we count on your nonpartisanship as,
Yes, you
as
can.
chair of this committee? I'm not done
Ms.
talking,
Khalid.
Mr. Chair.
You can, Ms. Khalid. I've recognized Mr. Barrett to start because his hand was up.
The meeting hasn't. No,
It did. As soon as the gavel dropped, you can challenge me if you like. Challenge me.
That's absolutely fine, but I would like an update as to why we have committee business today when we have so many motions that that we've had to go through and so many issues that that we needed to get through, and yet we're having another committee business meeting today, which doesn't help us understand because we haven't seen any work plans from you, we haven't seen any witness lists from you, we haven't seen how we are going to conduct ourselves with respect to all of these motions. And I don't understand why we had a committee.
So I was going to
today.
update the committee before your point of order.
Chair, clearly you passed the floor to Mr. Barrett, which is your right, absolutely, you know, because you only see that side of the floor. Great, good for you. But I would like to know what exactly it is that we're doing here. If we're having a committee business meeting, then I would like to know what is the committee's business from you, Chair, from all of these motions that we've passed, with all of these witnesses that we've submitted on all of these various studies, and yet we have no idea as to what it is that we're doing, except for calling motion after motion and just only referring to Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett might as well be.
You want me to answer the question?
Mr. Barrett might as well be the chair of this committee.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It's not a nomination.
Yeah. Okay. So the committee business was to update the committee on where we're at with witnesses. We had some challenges based on the fact that the motion was passed last Tuesday on the CRA. So as it stands right now, I wanted to update the committee that on the 19th, we've got the Privacy Commissioner scheduled. We have got H&R Block, so we just couldn't get anybody scheduled for today. H&R Block is also scheduled, and then on the 21st, we're still waiting to hear from the minister. The request has been made to have the minister appear before the committee, and then we're going to have the commissioner of the CRA. The challenge is that some of the commissioners are out of the country, and so we've been able to schedule those for the week of the 19th when we get back. I've got Mr. Barrett followed by Mr. Villemure. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett. Please, you have the floor.
Chair, I'm going to move a motion in regards to Minister Randy Boissonnault's involvement in global health imports and the firm's contracts with the Government of Canada. The committee called the following witnesses: Shauna Parker and Felix Papineau of Global Health Imports, Minister Randy Boissonnault, and Melvina Gowie. I've sent that to the clerk in both official languages, Chair, and I'd like to speak to the motion.
Okay, the motion is in order. Madam Clerk, have you shared that motion with members of the committee? It'll be coming around in a second. Mr. Barrett, you said you'd like to speak to the motion. Go ahead, sir.
Chair, it's a bit like Groundhog Day when it comes to this scandal with Randy Boissonnault, and it continues to both get headlines but concern Canadians. And with respect to our obligation and our mandate under the Conflict of Interest Act and the obligations of that minister to abide by it. And we've had appearances at this committee by the minister, by his business partners, and the minister claimed that he was not the person in question, that it was another Randy, that it wasn't him. But we have now new text messages or WhatsApp messages that are from Stephen Anderson from 2022, say, I just updated Felix and Randy, and we've got another, I won't tell Shauna and Felix and Randy yet. Now, while Mr. Anderson, the business partner, the 50% business partner with Justin Trudeau's minister from Edmonton, Randy Boissonnault, he claimed it was an autocorrect.
9 times.
9 times. But we now have more messages, so it would have to be more than 9 times. But in none of those 9 instances, nor in the new documents, does anyone ask, oh, who do you mean? Because I'm not familiar with that name. Oh, is that a typo? Is it someone else? No, they say it's Randy. Now, Randy has said that he's not the Randy in question. But we also have confirmation that there was no other Randy who worked at this firm. So we later learned that when the Liberal minister from Edmonton had said that he couldn't have communicated with his business partner Stephen Anderson on the dates in question, he was at a Liberal cabinet retreat and he was in a room impenetrable by electronic communications, and his phone was locked in a box and buried under the building. That, well, he did actually exchange text messages and have a phone call with his business partner, Stephen Anderson. So it's another example where we see that this Liberal minister is not being truthful. We also know that while he was a 50% owner of the company, they won a contract with the government of Canada. Well, he was sitting around the cabinet table. Of course, none of these things are acceptable, but what is of paramount importance is that when we have an issue like we did with Mr. Anderson, who this committee did vote by majority to send to the House that he had been in contempt and had prevaricated when he was here, and the Speaker has ruled on that. Well, now we have an issue of a similar nature with respect to the minister. So I'm not today looking for the committee to take a decision on if there's been a contempt by the minister, but I do think that we need information about this. And while these text messages or WhatsApp messages add a new dimension to what this committee's dealing with, it comes down to whether or not the minister was honest when he testified at this committee. But there's a story in the National Post today that says, Liberal minister's former business questioned over Indigenous claims in government contract bids. And it's highly suspicious at best. But at worst, it's fraud. And so, while that issue is one that perhaps we can discuss another day, it does certainly speak to the apparent dishonesty by the minister. We can't have people come before parliamentary committees and do anything other than tell us the truth. They can't not answer the question, and they can't lie to us.
Right.
So we do need answers to that. It is incumbent on this committee. And what we've heard time and time again from members of the Liberal Party is that, well, the ethics commissioner looked at it and said it was fine. Well, then he had to look at it again because it turns out he wasn't given all of the information. And then he had to look at it again because he wasn't given all of the information. I think that he's going to find himself surprised that he was again deprived of all of the information. But that's for the ethics commissioner to decide. He can take his decisions about what he would like to do. But this committee is solely responsible for whether or not we permit people to come before this committee and lie. And so we need to get answers, and it's important that the witnesses that are proposed in the motion also come and speak to this, because we've seen so far that the co-owners of the company have demonstrated themselves not to be honest. We are not looking for Mr. Anderson to return. The committee has taken a decision with respect to his conduct before this committee, referred it to the House, and the House will deal with it. But we do need to speak to another parliamentarian, his business partner, Mr. Boissonnault, and we need to hear from these two folks who come up every single time the minister's name is mentioned, and that's Shauna and Felix. No one in this committee should want to be made a fool of by people who are invited to come before us. But that's what's happening. We are being made a fool of by these witnesses who have come before the committee, and it can't be allowed to stand that that Randy Boissonnault can offer a different set of facts in answering the same question every time he comes before the committee. He needs to come here, tell us the truth, and then we can move on. But until we've finally got the truth, then this committee needs to undertake this study and get resolution. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I have Mr. Genuis next, followed by Ms. Shanahan, and then Mr. Cooper. Go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to speak in support of this motion for Mr. Barrett to bring back Liberal Minister Randy Boissonnault here to the Ethics Committee. And in particular, I want to speak to the issue of claims made that his
Mr. Genuis next, followed by Ms. Shanahan, and then Mr. Cooper. Go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to speak in support of this motion for Mr. Barrett to bring back Liberal Minister Randy Boissonnault here to the Ethics Committee. And in particular, I want to speak to the issue of claims made that his company, a company that he owned as minister that was also seeking federal government contracts, claims that this company was Indigenous. Now, the Government Operations Committee that I serve as a regular member on has been investigating this government's Indigenous procurement scandal. And we've been undertaking this investigation really at the request and in response to concerns that have been raised by Indigenous leaders themselves. Indigenous leaders have asked the Auditor General to look into the contracting scandal. And the basis of this scandal is basically that well-connected non-Indigenous elites have been able to take for themselves contracts that are supposed to go to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous businesses. It is cultural appropriation leading to financial misappropriation. It's people pretending to be Indigenous or entering into shady joint ventures where most of the benefit and most of the action is happening on the non-Indigenous side to try to appropriate benefits through these kinds of arrangements away from Indigenous communities towards well-connected non-Indigenous insiders. And this is a problem that we have become aware of, that we've been investigating for a number of months. And in fact, the AFN, Chief Bernard from the AFN said that in their view, most of those contracts from the Indigenous procurement set aside are going to shell companies. So this is a huge problem. It's a problem that has been brought to Parliament by Indigenous leaders themselves, and it's a problem that we have been trying to get to the bottom of. Meanwhile, Liberals have been saying, oh, there's nothing to see here, no big deal, we're trying to check the box and wanting to move on, rather than actually get into the substance of the issue and really take seriously what we're hearing from Indigenous leaders. Then we have today this revelation, though, that not only is it just well-connected elite insiders taking advantage of this program, but it is the most well-connected elite insider possible. That is a minister of the Crown. His own company has been trying to get contracts on the basis of a claim that the company is Indigenous owned. And looking back at the record, Minister Boissonnault has made all kinds of contradictory claims regarding his identity in various places, in various publications. And in the House today, the Liberals admitted, in fact, in response to a question period, they admitted that this business was never on the Indigenous business list. So the government is saying that that this company wasn't on the Indigenous business list, and yet the minister's company was making the claim that they were Indigenous on the basis of inconsistent claims about identity that the minister has made. So this is a very serious issue because we can see the legacy of various things that have been done to Indigenous peoples, tragic rates of poverty, and therefore the urgency of fully including Indigenous peoples in the economy, of supporting measures that advance economic development. And yet we have measures announced by the government then being taken advantage of by elite insiders, including a company that in the course of trying to get these contracts claimed to be fully Indigenous owned and that was able to do business with the government to their advantage. So we very much need to get to the bottom of these claims and the involvement of Minister Boissonnault in this very serious Liberal Indigenous procurement scandal. So I'm very supportive of the motion and look forward to him being brought back to testify before this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Genius. Monsieur Villemur, je m'excuse, mais j'ai supposé que tu...
Mr. Villemur, I apologize, but I thought you wanted to speak to something else. Okay, all right, thank you.
Chair, and it appears that this is where I came into this committee, was regarding this Mr. Anderson. It seems so sinister. This Mr. Anderson, who apparently has been playing fast and loose with using the name of Minister Boissonnault in his business dealings, on a multiple of occasions. And I seem to remember that when I came in, I think we were seeing the ethics commissioner for something like the third time, apparently, where we were questioning the ethics commissioner regarding these texts. And the commissioner had reiterated how he had conducted his investigation, and he was very clear about how he goes about his work. He's an independent officer of Parliament. He obviously takes this very seriously. It's the credibility of not only himself, but that institution, that role, that is coming under question when members of Parliament, particularly members of the official opposition, when they don't get what they want, that they repeatedly are calling for further investigations and questioning. Indeed, the report that the Commissioner of Conflict of Interest and Ethics had put forth to us. So it's, and indeed, the Minister Boissonnault had provided those text messages. I remember looking at them and saying, like, okay, what is this? This is like just, it was a banal thing about some kind of telecom thing or something, to check back, the sort of routine thing that when you leave a place of work, somebody's looking for you, looking for a contact, and so he said, no, I'm not involved in this anymore, and please contact the person that is handling this business. So it's this kind of mishmash of bits and pieces of text messages and WhatsApp messages and so on that actually showed that the minister had nothing to do with the business dealings of this Mr. Anderson. But this Mr. Anderson certainly demonstrated, from what I understand, now I wasn't there for his testimony, but I'm sure that colleagues here will fill us in, was very free and easy, apparently, with using the name of the minister. And from what I'm told about the character and conduct of that person, it certainly appears that he was doing it for his own purposes, his own profit, his own ends, and it's kind of a lesson to all of us to be careful about who we get involved in when that day comes that we find ourselves in the private sector, and in fact, I think it again. I found it very interesting at that point when I came into this committee that the ethics commissioner was able to talk about the rules around conflict of interest and the responsibilities of members. And indeed, we heard something of that earlier in the week when we heard from the lobbying commissioner, did we not? So at the same time, we have just completed what I think was a very fulsome report around misinformation and disinformation. And I know that there are other motions that are on the table that concern the privacy concerns of Canadians. I was very glad, Chair, that you were able to arrange for the testimony of the I guess you could call them the Big Four, the Facebook, X, TikTok, and who was the other one? Maybe there were two of them there from Facebook. I forget now. But I was very glad, and my constituents were very glad to see that this committee was undertaking that work to question les géants de web, as we call them in French, around the safeguarding of confidential data, how that data is used in algorithms, how that data is used in marketing purposes, and so on. And I think it is again goes to how we need to be very mindful that these bits and pieces of texts and messages and so on that people are trying to piece together to create a case. It really is. I don't think it's worthy of the work of this committee. But it's interesting what Mr. Genuis brought up, because that was from another committee that I was sitting on public accounts, when we were being made aware that there are companies that kind of specialize in Indigenous procurement, in obtaining obtaining public contracts, sort of using the set-aside for Indigenous procurement. And in fact, that there was one fellow, and Chair, I'm a paper person. My staff is trying to get me to get weaned off of paper, but I have this with me, and this is the David Yo, who was very proud to tell us that not only was he's a co-owner there of Dalian and Enterprises that uses this Indigenous, so I'm sure that this is being studied in public accounts, but that he was a Conservative member, and he was very proud to show us that this was sort of his claim to fame, and how he was able to go and attract customers because he was able to attract contracts for them. So, again, going to this, and I wouldn't say it's a gray area. I think it's quite clear.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
People do need to conduct themselves.
On a point of order, Mr. Genuis, not debate. Point of order, please.
Mm-hmm.
Is it correct that Mr. Yo actually ran for a different political party in the last election?
What's the actual point of order,
It's a point of
Chair?
debate.
I apologize. It wasn't actually.
Ms. Shanahan, go ahead, please.
PPC candidate, was that it?
That's it.
Yeah,
I was.
there it is.
Could we clarify if she's allowed to use props, though?
That's it, Mr. Genuis. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Shanahan. Go ahead.
Aren't they just a satellite party? If we're talking about the PPC, Maxime Bernier, whoever hears, what is he doing these days? Do we even know Maxime Bernier? Aucune idée. Aucune idée. That's right. Well, it's so. So again, if I look at this motion, it seems that we're trying to get back with another kick at the can. The ethics commissioner, I think, is going to be very right when he finally appears before us to talk about his budget and his office and so on, to say that he has to put aside a special budget just for these repetitive, redundant, frivolous attempts by opposition members to drag somebody into the mud. And so I'm really, as a serious member of this committee, I am really taken aback that once again we are back discussing these points. It's very clear to me again, and I think that was a unanimous motion, if I'm correct, that that Mr. Anderson is that not the subject of how many privilege motions? Is that not the subject of one of the privilege motions? That are before the House right now. So I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of piling on in this regard, and I would suggest that for clarity and for kind of keeping things on the right path, maybe one thing at a time would be a good strategy. But I digress. Chair, I really think that it's clear to me that there are obligations that we as MPs and as cabinet ministers have even more obligations. I'm happy to see the ethics commissioner really any time of the day or of week to further explain that, because that was something that I remember in my first round in this committee that we were very cognizant that many members really didn't have a good understanding of their duties under the conflict of interest and ethics legislation. And, people have been caught inadvertently. And I pride myself as somebody that's, former banker and so on, to put together your assets and liabilities and, revenue sources and your investments and so on. I pride myself in being pretty good at that. But even still, it can happen that you forget something. You have a separate account for a TFSA or something. And I'm always very pleased when someone from the office of the ethics, the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commission takes the time, gives us a call, explains what it is, and we're able to correct, because, God forbid that something should be posted and it's not correct. And I'm one of those people, to be hauled in front of this committee, to explain myself and so on. I don't think any member of Parliament would enjoy that. So I think that we have to let the commissioner do his work. He has, in this case, on 3 different occasions. Am I right? I believe it is on 3 different occasions, 3 different reports. And he has assured us that if there's any concerns, that he would be, of course, the first one to be cognizant and seized with having to do what would need to be done in that case, further investigations, further interviews, and so forth. So. I don't understand really why the Conservatives are not willing to let the commissioner do his work. It would seem to me that there are other better things that we could be doing. There's more productive things that we could be doing to be serving our constituents, and I'm quite sure that the other opposition members here would feel the same way. So Chair, I'm still putting my thoughts together on this. I would like to, please, if you can put me back on the list, because I'd like to come back and, after I've gathered my thoughts a little bit. But those were just some preliminary observations that I wanted to make. Thank you.
So I put Shanahan. I'm going to go to Mr. Cooper next. Go ahead.
Be on the list, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Shanahan alleged that Conservatives are bringing forward frivolous ethics complaints. I would remind Ms. Shanahan, through you, Mr. Chair, of the litany of guilty findings by the Ethics Commissioner with respect to key figures in this government. We have the Prime Minister, who was found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act, not once, but twice. The first Prime Minister in Canadian history to be found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act. How about the current Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, guilty of contravening the Conflict of Interest Act? And then there's the Trade Minister, Mary Ng, guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act. And remember Bill Morneau, the former finance minister under Justin Trudeau, guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act, I think twice in his case. And then there's the Prime Minister's former parliamentary secretary, guilty of contravening the Conflict of Interest Act. What we have, Mr. Chair, is a pattern of conflict and corruption in this government that goes right to the top, right to the Prime Minister.
Serial lawbreakers.
A bunch of serial lawbreakers. Indeed, the Prime Minister, their leader, is probably the biggest lawbreaker amongst them. Now, with respect to the motion that has been put forward by Mr. Barrett, the central question that must be answered is, who's Randy? And where is Randy, by the way? Where is he? In the face, he seems to be in hiding in the face of today's report in the National Post that he fraudulently represented that his company was Indigenous owned to secure millions of dollars of federal contracts. So where is he? It would be nice if he could show his face. But we have an affidavit that was filed on November 5th that we now have a copy of, and contained within the affidavit are a series of exhibits that include new text messages that cast further doubt about the minister's truthfulness when he came before this committee. Right. And I think it's important to look at the track record of this minister when it comes to telling the truth and when it comes to being forthcoming. This is a minister who came to this committee in June and was adamant that he wasn't the Randy in the text messages. But of course, the Gowie Group believed at all times that the Randy in the text messages was the Minister of Employment. Stephen Anderson was asked by Global News, who is the Randy in the text messages? And he said, well, it's the VP of Logistics. But when Global News looked into who is the VP of Logistics, they found out that it was not a Randy, it was a guy by the name of Edward Anderson, who turns out to be Stephen Anderson's father, Stephen Anderson being the shady business partner of the Minister of Employment. Global News made further inquiries to find a trace of this other Randy. They couldn't. Stephen Anderson came before the committee and said there was only one Randy that was ever connected to Global Health Imports, and that is the Minister of Employment. And not to mention the fact that in the original text messages that were discovered, the Randy is referenced in the context of being a partner. Well, it turns out that the Minister of Employment was a partner with Stephen Anderson up until he was elected in 2021, and at the time of the text messages, the minister had a 50% ownership stake in the company in Global Health Imports. So in the face of all of that, without any trace of another Randy, without any credible explanation of who this other Randy could be, there is really only one conclusion that can be drawn to the question of who's Randy, and that is that Randy is the Minister of Employment, the minister from Edmonton, a Randy who shook down Global Health Imports in a $500,000 wire fraud scheme, a Randy who was a 50% owner, a partner in a company that has been ordered by Alberta courts to pay back clients $7.8 million for ripping them off.
Unbelievable. Wow. Unbelievable.
We have a minister now who is part of a company that has been sued by the Gowie Group for this $500,000 shakedown when Global Health Imports failed to deliver the PPE that they had ordered pursuant to the contract that they had entered into. And remember when the minister came to committee in June, and one of the things that his office did at the time was issue a statement that said it could not have been the minister because the minister was in Vancouver on September the 8th, 2022, and he was at a cabinet meeting and he didn't have access to his phone, and therefore it was impossible that the Randy in the text messages was the minister. But then, after he appears before the committee the first time, Global News uncovers new text messages. New text messages from September 6, 2022, from between Anderson and the Gowie Group, in which Anderson, as he's shaking them down for the $500,000, says, asking as West Coast is closing in 7 minutes and Randy is in the Vancouver office. Wow. Oops. Wow. Randy is in Vancouver. Well, the minister, turns out, was in Vancouver on September the 6th. And when the minister came back to committee in September with these fresh text messages, fresh insofar as at the time they had just recently been made public, my colleague, Mr. Barrett, put it to him to say, come on, minister, you're obviously that Randy. And the minister was confronted with the text messages, admitted that, yes, he was in Vancouver on September 6th, and then he provided new information that he had withheld from the committee, and that is that he had texted and spoken with Anderson on September the 6th. Wow. Now, when the minister came in June, he would have had committee believe that he had nothing to do with Anderson.
Exactly.
That upon being elected in 2021, other than having a 50% ownership stake, which is a pretty big deal, that he never spoke to this guy. He had nothing to do with the operations of the company. He was totally oblivious to what was going on. And then he comes back confronted with text messages placing him in Vancouver at the same time that Anderson is referring to a Randy in Vancouver. He suddenly says, oh, by the way, I spoke with Anderson. That constituted a material omission on the part of the minister. The minister, for all intents and purposes, misrepresented to this committee his dealings with Anderson by his omission.
Exactly.
And so it's part of a pattern of not being forthcoming. It's part of a pattern of a minister who is changing his story as new details emerge. So now that we have these additional text messages that evidence that the minister was not forthcoming and may provide further evidence that the minister was involved in fraud, it will be interesting to see how his story changes when he comes, hopefully, before this committee as soon as possible. Exactly. And so we need to hear from this minister. He shouldn't be a minister. Exactly. He should have been fired long ago as a minister. He has no place sitting in the cabinet, given his record of frankly not being forthcoming, being implicated in this shady business that is ridden by allegations of fraud, and not just allegations of fraud. I just emphasize again, $7.8 million in judgments by Alberta courts against his company, the company that he had a 50% interest in, stemming from lawsuits from the time that he was a partner in the business. So, Mr. Chair, it's important that we pass Mr. Barrett's motion and haul Minister Boissonnault back to this committee.
Hear, hear. Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Fisher, go ahead on the motion.
To the comments by Mr. Barrett and Mr. Cooper. Listen to the comments from Mr. Genius, but those were on a different issue. Those were on the National News Watch story or the National Post story about the Indigenous angle. I don't see anything. So we've supported this motion in the past, or motion almost exact like this, and we've had this looked at by the Ethics Commissioner every time Mr. Barrett's asked for it to go to the Ethics Commissioner. I seem to recall when we asked him one time, does he look into something when asked by a parliamentarian? I think he said yes. So obviously, if this committee decides to ask again, he'll look into it again. But I don't see anything in the motion that's new. I didn't hear anything in the debate that wasn't new. It was more, let's get some clips talking about this and talking about that. But I didn't hear anything new. Nothing new in this. No, we've seen all that stuff. Well, I feel we've seen it all. So, you know, I don't see any sign of anything new while the minister was a minister. So, you know, there's talk about things coming out when he wasn't a minister in between 2019 and 2021. But I don't see anything that's coming up today that's brand spanking new in this motion, other than asking for some different people for the same topic. And one of those people on the list is already pegged to come to this committee. So I guess I'll continue to listen to the debate and continue to listen to the rationale for why we want to do this yet again. It reminds me of that awesome Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day. I expect if you bring the same people in for the same questions, you're going to get the same answers. But again, I'll listen to what other members of the committee have to say.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Housefather, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my confusion stems around the fact that the motion asks us to call the head of the Gowie Group, and then different employees of Global Health Imports who are the subject of a civil claim where the Gowie Group is suing the company for $500,000 approximately. And this committee is not a court. I have no basis to use the words like Mr. Cooper was using before, like shakedown, and making assumptions as to which side is right in a lawsuit that is being taken. I think we were all displeased and dismayed by the testimony of Mr. Anderson, who is one of the defendants in this lawsuit, which is why this committee unanimously voted to recommend to the House to hold him in contempt and bring him before the House. And to me, all of the issues that relate to Mr. Boissonnault, who has testified now twice before the committee on this issue, are ones that relate to Mr. Anderson and his text messages and his telephone calls and claims that he made. And so, to me, we're not going to gain anything related to the ethical behavior of Mr. Boissonnault by bringing Mr. Boissonnault back to the committee a third time, when he will no doubt make the same comments that he made in the first two times that he was here. We have testimony, or at least we have reporters who have interviewed Ms. Gowie, who said that she never spoke directly or communicated directly with Mr. Boissonnault. So all she could possibly offer is hearsay testimony as to her communications with Mr. Anderson. And so I'm at a loss to the point of this motion when these are issues that we're still dealing with and relitigating that we've talked about ad nauseum at the committee. The one thing that I would be willing to entertain is bringing Mr. Anderson back again to ask him the difficult questions, since he has yet to appear before the bar of the House, given the filibustering going on in the House on a different privilege motion. But I certainly don't see, as of now, what value Ms. Gowie brings when she herself has said she's never had any direct relationship, communication with Mr. Boissonnault. So she has nothing that could allow the committee to conclude that he committed an ethical violation, because all that she would know would be what somebody else told her. And bringing Mr. Boissonnault back again for a third time, I don't think yields anything new either. We would need to hear from Mr. Anderson under oath, and being required by the Speaker to answer what it is that caused him to type repeatedly Mr. Boissonnault's name in his text messages. I think we all do not believe that it is credible that this was a spell check issue, and what caused him to use Mr. Boissonnault's name. I could think of many reasons. Mr. Boissonnault himself speculated on what those reasons may be as to why he would use Mr. Boissonnault's name. But I think really the only person that makes sense to hear from is Mr. Anderson. And I think the House should proceed to that privilege motion and bringing him to the bar of the House as quickly as possible. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the floor now, and maybe I'll come back later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Housefather. I'm going to go to my friend from Chateauguay-Lacole. I have family that lives there. Go ahead, Ms. Shanahan.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, I do.
Yes. Oh,
Chateauguay.
we'll have to chat there offline. Wonderful. Yeah, so I was saying that I wanted to gather my thoughts on this, but just to pick up on what Mr. Housefather was saying, because that's where I was going to. Now, I am not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, but that's what I was thinking. It's an old joke, but it's a good one. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Green. But this idea that there's sort of this piling up of different actions between committee testimony, reporting to the commissioner, conflict of interest and ethics, not just once, not just twice, but 3 times, and 3 times, not just once, not just twice, but 3 times. The commissioner coming back with basically no findings that warrant further investigation. So that there is a privilege motion somewhere in the lineup. It seems to me, what could be delaying the House getting to that privilege motion? I don't know. Maybe somebody could help me out with that. But I think we voted on one sub-amendment, and who knows? Yes, who knows where? Yes, exactly. But I understand that every single member of Parliament on the Conservative side must speak to the, is it the sub-amendment now? The sub of the sub-amendment, that's right. It's so refreshing to see such passion in the House, in the matter of debate. But yes, if members are really serious about wanting to find out, maybe they don't want to find out what Mr. Anderson has to say under oath. That's another interesting question to explore. Maybe they have their doubts as to what Mr. Anderson will provide by way of evidence, or they don't want to hear what Mr. Anderson has to say under oath, and they simply are trying to delay that privilege motion indefinitely. I'm just speculating here, Chair, but I certainly have my doubts as to the sincerity of some of my colleagues. I hate to say that, because I'd like to believe that that every member of Parliament here is here to get to the truth of matters and to work on behalf of Canadians. But it's just possible that in this case there is some partisan games going on. I hate to go there. But there you have it.
We didn't even get to
yes. Well, you know what? Put yourself on. Are you on the list, Mr. Green? Because
we haven't even talked about the cocaine yet.
Very good. So let's have Mr. Green on the list, and we'll get to him. We'll get to him very shortly. Yeah,
the third person connected.
Yes, we're in for some revelations apparently.
Can we keep the debate on topic?
Yes, that's right.
Go ahead.
But and I did want to address something else. I have worked with Mr. Cooper on a number of different committees, and I certainly can appreciate Mr. Cooper's style, but the whole kind of guilty thing, I don't know, maybe that's effective as a social media clip, I suppose. That's not my thing, but it's when the commissioner appeared before us and talked to us about how what the act was intended to do, and I believe the act came into force and was renewed a few times, but what it intends to do is to really act as guidelines with, yes, there is some punitive aspect to it as well, there should be, but it's not a court of law. It really is to kind of call members back into line when there is a behavior or actions or activities or omissions or something that would not even so much as that it's the individual themselves, although they need to be called back into line, but our concern there is Parliament as a whole. Is it not that we want Canadians to have confidence in the workings of Parliament, in that any member of parliament who is serving, who earns certainly a well above average salary, I think we can all agree, we earn a healthy salary. It's public as well as well it should be. That our expenses are duly advertised. You know, our expenses are made public, and I seem to remember, this was before my time as a parliamentarian, but there was quite a scandal around expenses. There was a senator who was, lived in Ottawa, but was claiming PEI, a shack or something. I don't know, maybe someone here remembers the name. Was a former journalist there, Duffy? Duffy, that's right. Mike Duffy, that's right. I used to enjoy his programs, but when you hear about that somebody who should know better, somebody who's reporting on the behavior of parliamentarians, was he himself, double billing the Canadian taxpayer, pretending like he was living in PEI, because I believe he was a senator from PEI. And yet his home here in Ottawa was his principal residence. I mean, that's the kind of thing, that really leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And then somebody, the chief of staff or something, wrote a check to cover his expenses, like to make the whole thing go away. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I remember being impressed that he actually had a checkbook, because so few people do have a checkbook. I don't know if you can do an e-transfer these days for the tens of thousands of dollars that apparently that check was for. I think it was $90,000 or something. Yeah, really quite something.
Did somebody go to jail as well?
Did somebody go to jail for that as well? Well, listen, I'll let another member talk about that, because I can't remember everything. I was doing other things at the time, but just again, this committee, our mandate to be the committee that oversees those four critical, independent commissioner roles, which again form the basis for having confidence in our parliamentary system, whether it be, as we saw the other day, Commissioner of Lobbying, who makes sure that people that that are registered as lobbyists are not at the same time acting as political advisors, and vice versa. I won't go over that. I'm sure that's all on record from that last meeting. But the privacy commissioner, the access to information commissioner, and of course the commissioner for conflict of interest and ethics. En même temps, Monsieur le Président.
At the same time, Mr. Chair, the people in my riding are very much interested in the work that we do here. So I would like to underline the fact that the role of the commissioner is quite interesting. Any member of the public, if I'm not mistaken, or at least members of the parliament, can write to the commissioner. They can file a complaint or let the commissioner know about something they have observed. And when that happens, the commissioner launches a review or an investigation in an independent manner while remaining within the boundaries of confidentiality, which is, of course, necessary because we don't want to have unbased complaints or complaints sent nilly-willy by opponents in order to simply attack someone, a colleague, or someone else, simply because they're a member of a different political party. That is not the objective of this mechanism or the role of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. The way I see it, their role consists of providing guidance to members, and I think every member here pays a lot of attention to these issues. I think it's around December or January, and it's an important email. You should not miss that email, and there's a deadline, because if you miss the deadline, you will get a call. They will let you know that your financial filing or report was not received in time. They are really meticulous in terms of collecting this information, and they have every right to do so. And I would imagine that they have employees, researchers, civil servants who will go through all of the information, all of the submissions with great detail to see whether, for instance, if there has been an MP who had shares in such and such company and whether that company had any dealings or contracts with the government. And that is a lot of work that should be keeping many employees here on Parliament Hill busy. But that's it. That is the system we must have to make sure that people are following the rules. When the commissioner arrives at a conclusion or when they publish a report, they could also issue fines, I think up to $200. And in their conclusion, in their document, they will outline what they observed. And they would say that there's been a violation of the rules and it's up to the member to rectify the situation.
Il y a une peine d'emprisonnement.
But they don't, of course, dish out prison sentences. It doesn't come to that, as my colleague was doing. Guilty, guilty. It was quite dramatic. So, as I was saying, anyone can find themselves in a situation where they've forgotten about a TFSA account or something along those lines. And this information then becomes public. So, in this case, after the first complaint and the first investigation, or at least the first time that the commissioner reached a conclusion that Mr. Boissonnault had not been in violation of the rules, while the commissioner could have refused the subsequent complaints because they have other work to do. And I believe there are many other files waiting for their attention. But that's not what they did. So this really goes to show that they are really particular and pay a lot of attention to what they're doing. So they accepted a second investigation. They didn't find anything. And they issued a report on that saying they hadn't found anything. And they even did that for a third time, for a third complaint. And they said, no, there's nothing here. And he appeared before this committee to speak to this very topic. Well, on this side of the committee room, we agree fully that when there is an incident or something that raises questions, that should be looked into. And if the commissioner were not to fulfill their role, it would also be up to us to ask questions. And I think that was the case when Mr. Barrett moved his first motion and the commissioner was in the process of carrying out their investigation, but it wasn't fast enough for Mr. Barrett. So Mr. Barrett wants to have their cake and eat it too. So he wants it all. So they should really let the commissioner do their work. But we had the minister also, who appeared before the committee. I think it was in June that we met the commissioner for the first time. I wasn't able to attend that, participate in that meeting, but I thought that it was quite transparent that we were able to invite an officer of the parliament of this caliber who was able to answer questions very clearly and say that what the minister had done was in full compliance with the Act and the regulations. And that the minister had met all the requirements as outlined in the Act with regard to businesses. And this was the subject of the complaint and of the motion by Mr. Barrett. So there was no need for this committee to launch a study on that, because we also need to be careful about not doing the same work and casting aspersions on what the commissioner might or might not do, because it's not the committee's role to do the job of an officer of the parliament. Because the committee, in doing that, could hinder the work of the commissioner. And I don't think anyone here wants to do that. Given all the work done by the Auditor General, with regard to the parliamentary, with regard to the budget, or we also have the parliamentary budget officer doing his work, and they are real professionals doing the work that they have. But of course, we as parliamentarians, we have all of our privileges. If we were to start stepping on their toes, that wouldn't help things. And I don't think anyone here is trying to do that. But it's clear that the Conservatives were not happy. Mr. Barrett came back with another round of questions. And we talked a lot about messages. And we said, okay, we could maybe ask the commissioner to look into this. and everyone agreed on the committee. And the minister proactively sent all his phone records, logs within the time frame that was provided to him. So we had the documents here in committee as well. And we saw clearly that there were no WhatsApp calls or messages from Minister Boissonnault, and it was Stephen Anderson who was involved with this company, GHI. I don't think that was what Mr. Barrett was trying to do, or the Conservatives in general. They kept attacking, and they did not let it go. They did not let anything disrupt their narrative, but when the Commissioner of Conflict of Interest and Ethics did their investigation with all the documents, he concluded that there was no evidence that the minister was implicated. In another committee, because apparently it's not enough to take the time of one committee and to monopolize the work and the time of one committee, they need to do this elsewhere in other committees too. But it was clearly stated that Mr. Boissonnault had offered to provide all the information on September 8th, his phone calls, conversations, messages, emails, etc. And the commissioner and his team looked into all of this. And it was clear that there was no contact between him, the minister, and Mr. Anderson. So I think it's really clear. I don't know if we want to have the commissioner here at every meeting, Mr. Chair, but it's apparently what it's coming to. It seems like we're going to keep inviting him at multiple occasions for the same thing. And Mr. Barrett kept going. Yes, but were there other messages? And the commissioner said he had made the request. He had asked the minister to know whether there was any additional information. And he said, if ever I receive anything else, I will try to see what the situation is with regard to Mr. Anderson, the person of interest. Whether they had used Minister Boissonnault's name or whether they are still having conversations and discussions. And apparently, another committee yet, a third committee, also had the commissioner appearing, and he confirmed there that there was no ongoing investigation concerning the minister. So we keep repeating the same thing, and once again, we are saying the same thing, and we are hearing the same thing, the same narrative. And regardless of what the commissioner is saying, we keep hearing the same thing. I wouldn't even want to suggest this, but if anyone here wants to question the competency, the skill, and the professionalism of the commissioner, then I might have an issue with that, because that is really something unacceptable. Our role here at committee is to make sure all officers that are connected to this committee are accountable. But at one point in time, I believe it was Mr. Cooper who was yelling at the commissioner at another committee, asking him why he was not launching an investigation. So please let me know, Mr. Cooper, that it wasn't you who did that or who said that, because it's really not worthy of your role, because I know you have your qualities, and that it's not something that I would expect from you, because I do not think that you are a member of the parliament who would attack an officer of the parliament who is simply trying to do their job and do what they are supposed to be doing as an independent officer. Mr. Chair, I think I will end my remarks now, and I hope that the people in my riding now have an understanding of where I'm coming from and why we do the work that we do here. Because they think that our report on misinformation and disinformation is quite interesting, because it's quite the concern these days. Because there are people who really like using Facebook and staying in touch with their family and friends on such platforms. So they are now much more aware of the risks of relying maybe a little too much on social media. And this is work that this committee has done. So I'd like to really thank everyone who has done that work. And I hope because I have heard through the grapevine that Mr. Villemure has an interesting motion that he would like to move. So I would like for him to have the opportunity to do that. But it's clear that we must not be losing time with repetitive motions such as the one from Mr. Barrett moved once again today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, merci, Madame.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Up next will be Ms. Khalid, Mr. Green, Mr. Housefather, and then Mr. Baines.
Oh, I'm next. Okay, sorry. Well, you should have paid more attention to you there, Chair. I appreciate that. Life would be a lot better if we all understood what our challenges are and how we can work together to resolve a lot of them. Chair, I wanted to today, because it was committee business and it was a bit of a surprise, but there was an issue that I had really wanted to discuss with our committee members and try to see if that's something that we could do in our committee to try to resolve it. Now again, I know Mr. Cooper sat with me on the Justice Committee many years ago when we went across the country on the issue of human trafficking, and put forward some really strong recommendations. And some of those recommendations involved hotels and the hospitality sector and what their contribution or what their role is and their accountability is to deal with issues of human trafficking. And so, like as the Hotels Association of Canada was on the Hill meeting with MPs, and I know this was an issue that we had brought up during our cross-country tour. I was really hoping that we can find a way to make sure that hotels, Airbnbs, and other short-term stay places, not only do we should we know how they track their data, because obviously, when you go and check into a hotel or a place, short-term stay place, you need to provide your government-issued ID, you need to provide your credit card information. I was really hoping that we could see how is the privacy of Canadians maintained there, but then also how can these short-term stay places, including hotels and Airbnbs and motels, work with law enforcement to ensure that cases of human trafficking are proactively monitored. I'm getting to my point.
I still get to do my point of order. I'm going to speak once today.
Point of order, Mr. Green.
Relevance. This is completely irrelevant to the task at hand. Thank you.
And I agree, although the chair let Mr. Genuous go on in ad nauseum about things that had nothing to do with this particular motion as well. So I'll just give her a little bit of latitude, but not very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You look good in that chair, Mr. Fisher.
I looked over it. Wow, okay.
Not for a very long time. You're fine. So I appreciate the reminder by the NDP member. My point in raising all of this was that is what I had hoped to discuss in committee business today, as opposed to something that has been hashed and rehashed again and again and again and again by the Ethics Commissioner, by this committee, by that committee, by the House of Commons, with no end in sight. What I'm trying to say is that the Ethics Commissioner 3 times indicated that this matter is closed, that he has nothing to see, that there's nothing to investigate here, that he has conducted his investigation and found nothing at the end of the day from the minister's part. I'll also say, Mr. Chair, that it's been 9 years for me as a member of Parliament. I go to hundreds of events. In fact, over this past year, I think I've attended over 1,000 events within my community. I take photos with hundreds and thousands of people on a regular basis who, post these photos out of love, out of respect, and I post their photos with me out of love and respect as well. What is the perception of a close tie is not always a reality of a close tie. And I think that the work of the Ethics Commissioner has been really strong on this, because he has been asked time and time and time again to look into this issue. There have been multiple times when the minister himself has been questioned about this. And yet, we're still exactly where we were in the beginning, where the Ethics Commissioner still says there's no investigation to be had here, where the minister has been very firm and has stayed consistent with what he's had to say on this. And we are yet, again, using important committee resources to rehash an issue. And talking about the motion here specifically, the member, I don't know his writing, Mr. Barrett has said, like, he's listed Ms. Gowie as one of the witnesses when we know that she's already agreed and has expressed interest to appear in this committee. So I'm not sure why she's on the witness list. It makes no sense to me when somebody has said, I'm coming, I want to come, invite me, let's go. And yet, here we are trying to create this perception that people are not being collaborative. In that, Mr. Majumdar, just, you want to laugh, that's absolutely fine. Just to a corner, please, so I'm not distracted, if that's okay. Secondly, Minister Boissonnault has appeared twice. Chair.
I just pointed at him.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate your cooperation here. Minister Boissonnault has appeared twice in this committee, has answered quite honestly, like quite disrespectful questions from the opposition parties, and has done so with open arms. I'm not sure what more the opposition members want to hear from him. And then the organization, sorry, I don't have the motion in front of me, but the organization that's listed, the two witnesses from that organization, had nothing to do with Minister Boissonnault. I'm not sure why they're listed. So for me, somebody like, and I in the past week, I had put forward a motion for this committee to contemplate how food services, delivery services, how they're using Canadians' data and using surcharges. And then today, I had wanted to present a motion on how we can protect Canadians through the hotel sector from human trafficking. When I have all of these issues that my constituents are talking to me about, and yet I get to sit here and I get to talk about something that has been hashed out 3 times by the ethics commissioner, who had said every single time that there's nothing to investigate here, and yet here we are being the kangaroo court. Why? It to me makes no sense at all when there are so many important issues as a committee for us to look into, for us to investigate, if that's the right word, and for us to review and provide relevant recommendations to the government. Chair, I don't even know when was the last time we had tabled a report in this committee. We have a lot of work to do. And for us to sit here and
Go ahead, Ms. Khalid, you on the floor.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chair. For us to sit here and contemplate as to how we are going to get somebody in a gotcha moment when the ethics commissioner himself has said there is no gotcha moment. I'm not sure why we are wasting very, very important resources of the House. I'm not sure why we are wasting the 50 people that are here in this room and their time to discuss this when we could be discussing some really significant issues that actually impact Canadians. It's one thing to say, all right, you know what? We need to look into this. We need to make sure that everything was done by the book, that everything is right, and we have the right people come before this committee, reassure Canadians that the issue is taken care of. It's another issue entirely to be badgering. 3 times the ethics commissioner said, 3 times he said that there is no investigation here. There's nothing to investigate. 3 times he said that. And yet, the Conservatives find it to be their hobby and their top priority to continually badger and harass the Ethics Commissioner into going at this issue again and again and again. And then leveraging the important resources of this committee to do that. When there are so many important issues for us to be diving into, when there are so many important issues for us to review, to provide recommendations on, to hear from witnesses on, to hear from experts on, and yet we sit here so that we can get clips for the Conservatives so they can raise their money off of their little fundraising pages and their little social media clickbaits that they love to project. It's unfortunate, Chair. I really wish that the party opposite, with their allies, the Bloc and the NDP, had taken more consideration into government resources, into ensuring that we are doing right by what this committee's mandate is, and how we can ensure that we are actually trying to help Canadians at the end of the day. Chair, I had come into this meeting with some really good faith that I would be able to move forward on a motion to look into how data collection and by the hotel industry and their collaboration with law enforcement can help human trafficking victims. What I've done here instead is that I've sat here and rehashed something that has been completely figured out by the Ethics Commissioner 3 times over. So I am baffled. I am absolutely baffled as to how and why we got to this point. I think we can do better, Chair. I really think that we can do better. I think that we can put this matter aside and that we can move on to matters that actually help Canadians, that help young women that are being trafficked every day in my riding, for example, and all across Canada. But at this point, though, I'd like to move an amendment to this motion. Because Ms. Gowie has already expressed an interest to appear in this committee, there's no reason for her to be included on a witness list that Mr. Barrett has presented. So I seek to amend the motion by removing Ms. Gowie's name from the motion because she is already going to come before us anyway. It doesn't make sense for us to be redundant. And I'll park my comments there, Chair, and I'd like to be added to the bottom of your speaking list again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid. So there Ms. Gowie from the list on the amendment. Mr. Green? Thank you. Yep, go ahead.
And I do appreciate, opening up discussions around witnesses. And I talked about this sordid tale. In my estimation, this is a made-for-TV movie, I guess now Netflix series, perhaps, given the twists and turns. I remember the revelations of Mr. Anderson, and much to the chagrin of the Conservatives who filibustered as though we're part of some cover-up, they will recall, as will the Hansard, it was in fact my line of questioning that finally got him to admit that indeed there was no other Randy. But I recall at that meeting being dumbfounded that there were so many sordid twists and turns out of his testimony. The one thing that never came to light was indeed this other connection to what was a massive cocaine smuggling operation. And I reference a Global News article so that people watching didn't get confused about my earlier references to this. This is so twisted that we never actually got to this part, which is wild. That back in July of 16th of 2024, the headline reads, Boissonnault's former business partner linked to a woman detained in Dominican Republic cocaine bust. Liberal cabinet minister Randy Boissonnault's former partner in a medical supply company has ties to an Edmonton woman who was detained in a massive cocaine bust in the Dominican Republic in April 2022. The federal incorporation documents show that Stephen Anderson, chief operating officer of Global Health Imports, created a numbered company with Francesca LeBon in December of 2021. If you're looking at timelines, this would also align with the time in which Mr. Boissonnault had business dealings, with Mr. Anderson. So we're at least one degree of separation, maybe less as the story evolves, that this was 4 months before she was actually detained in a Caribbean country. Now, Boissonnault and Arsenault, they co-owned GHI until, mid-June, and he did claim that he had dropped the shares. But what happened in that case was international in headlines. Like, this was, for a moment, an international story, but what was never connected to this particular study was this person's possible connection. Now, the Dominican authorities detained 12 Canadians, including LeBond, after a crew from the Canadian charter company, Pivot Airlines, said that they discovered, and I'm not talking small amounts here, 210 kilograms of cocaine hidden in their plane. Like, that would make Escobar blush. And yet here we are, with this degree. Now, I should note that she was released, but she also was previously under RCMP investigation and has a history of drug charges under a previous name, Francesca Kwok. Now, she wasn't charged. She was released by the RCMP. But just to give a bit of an example of the types of circles that Mr. Anderson was in a direct business relationship with, 1 degree of separation. There's lots of questions that we have about whether they had an office, whether they didn't have an office, so on and so forth.
A point of order, but finish your thought, but I do have a point of order I want to bring.
Oh, no, feel free to take the point of order.
So is it?
I have many thoughts.
Very,
so is
very
it a
generous,
point of order on the amount of cocaine,
well, just on
what's the point of order on?
You're on relevance?
Just on the that it does say in the article that Randy Boissonnault has not met. So I would like. Can we have this article? Can we have be provided with it?
Mr. Chair, I would encourage members.
Go ahead,
I would have understood the honourable member, who's very learned, had they had said relevance, and I would have responded in a point of order to say it's relevance, and now in this amendment, we're looking to remove people. I believe that there could be, the potential to expand the list of people, because I am curious about whether or not, in any way, shape, or form, if I had Mr. Boissonnault here, I would ask him directly, did Francesca LeBlond or Francesca Kwok, whatever the alias that she's used, have any connection whatsoever with GHI? I would want to know that. In fact, I would be interested, because maybe I couldn't take Mr. Boissonnault's word for it, what she would have to say for this. So if we're in this process now where we're going to be removing people or adding people, just know that there could be the possibility of sub-amendments. Again, Mr. Chair, looking at all this stuff, the fact that that was part of the story back in July but didn't actually get dealt with in this committee just shows how twisted this whole affair is. So I won't move a sub-amendment to the amendment, but I will say I have questions about Francesca LeBland's business relationship with Mr. Anderson and whether or not there was any connection directly or indirectly with Mr. Boissonnault, because when we're talking about integrity and ethics, I think business dealings with people who are under investigation, although not charged, under investigation for smuggling massive amounts of cocaine. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I am from Hamilton Center, and I would say if your other business is in import and exports and your business partner is attached to somebody connected to smuggling, there's lots of questions still to be had. Those are my remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Green. Just before, I see Mr. Housefather and Mr. Baines' hands up. I had you on the main motion. I don't have you on the amendment. Is that correct? Okay. So the other thing, just to let committee members know, I have asked the clerk to get us as much time as we need to deal with this issue. Ms. Khalid on the amendment, please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to clarify because from my understanding, you had put it to the committee to say that Ms. Gowie had wanted to come and that you would invite her, and I believe that nobody in this committee disagreed. And so that's the only reason why I'm asking for that to be removed from the motion, because my understanding is that she has been invited to come and that you are working on scheduling it in already. So it doesn't make sense for us to be redundant in the motion before us today.
The motion indicates that Ms. Gowie is to appear. We have agreed as a committee that she's to appear. If redundancy is the issue, then I'll leave it to the committee. But you did move an amendment, an amendment. So I'm going to deal with we're going to deal with the amendment, and if it's the will of committee to remove her from that list, then we'll proceed on that basis. But I don't see.
Chair, I just want to clarify that removing her from the list does not mean that we are not inviting her to this committee. My understanding
100%.
is that she has already been invited and that you are working on scheduling her in. That is why I'm asking for. That's why I'm asking her to be removed from the motion.
We have reached out. We've been given an indication of her willingness to appear before committee. There's been some circumstances that have prevented her from coming before the committee up to this point. Right now, the indication that we have is roughly around December 16th, I believe, Madam Clerk, around that time?
Yes,
okay.
Available in December.
Yeah, so I have to deal with what I've got in front of me, and that is that the motion, the amendment to remove her, I don't have any other discussion on this issue on the amendment. So do I have consensus on the amendment? No. Okay, so I'm going to call the roll on the amendment then, and we'll go from there. But I have to deal with what I've got in front of me, Ms. Khalid, and that's what I'm trying to do here, okay? It's not politics. It's
sorry, not
the
you,
motion.
Chair. Sorry, I'm not saying that about
amendment, vote. That's the way it works around here. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The vote is on the amendment by Ms. Khalid. Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Mr. Fisher. Yes. Mr. Housefather.
Yes.
Ms. Khalid.
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett.
No.
Mr. Shamumda.
Mr.
Majumdar.
Majumdar? No.
Mr. Cooper. Monsieur Villemur.
No.
Mr. Green.
Je vote contre.
Yeas 5, nays 5.
And I vote against. So the amendment is defeated. I am going to go back to the main motion. And Mr. Green, you are next on the list on the main motion. Okay, so you did that during the amendment. And now I'm going to go to Mr. Housefather, your hand is not up. Is that?
It was up, Mr. Chair. It was up.
Are you ready to go? Because you're next on the list. Go ahead, please.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Et enfin, je veux revenir à...
I would like to come back to the question of the people we're going to invite. So Minister Boissonnault, are we going to invite him before the committee for a third time? I do understand that the question before the committee is whether or not Minister Boissonnault had any dealings with the company after the date on which he became minister. And Mr. Boissonnault appeared before this committee twice, and he told us that he was not involved with the company after that date. So the real question here is, why was Mr. Anderson using Mr. Boissonnault's name at multiple occasions in his text messages and maybe even other conversations with people who were potential clients or suppliers of the company. For that, we need Mr. Anderson. The first time Mr. Anderson was before this committee, it was clear that he was a horrible witness. And for that reason, and also for simply because Mr. Anderson did not provide the information requested by the committee, we unanimously, as a committee, asked the House to raise a question of privilege and to bring Mr. Anderson before the bar of the House of Commons to answer questions before the Speaker and before all Canadians. For me, that is the next step. And for me, it is completely useless to invite witnesses who did not have direct communication with Mr. Boissonnault. It's useless to have, for a third time, Mr. Boissonnault without having new information available to us. So what we should be doing is we should have the House to refer to the current question of privilege, and it should send that question of privilege to the Procedure Committee, which is what was suggested by the chair in the motion that is before the House, and there's a filibuster going on in the House by the Conservative Party. Now, once that privilege motion is dealt with, and it has to do with Mr. Anderson, and we can then all very quickly and unanimously adopt that motion and bring Mr. Anderson before the House so that we are provided with real answers. If Mr. Anderson appears before the House and if we find that there is new information to be gleaned that would help us understand why Mr. Anderson had been using the name of Mr. Boissonnault in his text messages and his conversations, then yes, it might be useful to invite Mr. Boissonnault and other witnesses at that point in time. But for me, it is completely useless and pointless to deal with that before we have had Mr. Anderson before the House of Commons. That is why I will be voting against this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you, Mr. Housefather. Next up, we're going to Mr. Baines on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, a lot has been discussed here, and I'm going to try to add some comments to sort of, we've gone into a lot of different directions. So it's clear Mr. Anderson and his appearance here, his actions were unacceptable. He's clearly misled the committee in a number of different ways. And he's using Minister Boissonnault's name to leverage his interests in some capacity in a number of different ways. So I wanted to just go back to maybe, and I agree with Mr. Housefather that this matter can be dealt with in the House, as we've all agreed to, as long as the Conservative Party can drop the filibuster that's been going on there for a number of weeks. And ultimately, that's not up to me, but if this matter is to be studied at a committee, and this goes back to Mr. Barrett's original motion, it's to do with an application to the Indigenous procurement, and as a member of OGO, and I know Mr. Barrett is also a member of OGO, and we have an Indigenous study that is being taken place there currently. It's underway. It's been a robust study. The committee's been proceeding collaboratively in the study to look at how the procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses being established first in 1996. We've had a number of different witnesses come in. First Nations Finance Authority, First Nations Financial Management Board, Plato Testing, National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association, Assembly of First Nations, Canadian Council for Indigenous Businesses. We've discussed lists. How do government lists find Indigenous businesses and who should best manage these lists? Who should be applying for things that need to apply for, that are warranted to, qualified for, accredited to apply for as an Indigenous business? So I think it could be helpful if this study, specifically Mr. Anderson and his what led him to apply and get to the bottom of why. Why would he consider this? What are the different questions that we can ask? And at the same time talk about how under the program, federal organizations may set aside a procurement for Indigenous business under the PSIB, but in some cases, the set-asides are mandatory. These set-asides give Indigenous business a right of first refusal, exclusive bidding rights, federal contracting opportunities. What led Mr. Anderson to think that he could apply? So in August 2021, the government, Canada, recommitted to renewing and strengthening the economic relationship with Indigenous entrepreneurs and communities by providing increased economic opportunities for First Nations, Inuit, Métis businesses through the federal procurement process. And we've seen initial reports show that government departments are now actually exceeding the 5% target. And that's not a maximum by any means. So it was a minimum target that was set. And this, of course, continues to allow for more opportunities to work with Indigenous businesses and continue to try and improve. And, as we talk with First Nations, Inuit, Métis partners, including business leaders, financial institutions, to figure out what's working, what's not, and how to do it better, we need to root out these type of, false applications or applications that are, quite frankly, going back to Mr. Anderson, him using a minister's name to leverage. It's clear that that's what he's been doing in a lot of these messages to try to maybe even, intimidate whoever he's working with and saying, oh, I have this minister on side. And it's not, it's probably not the first time people have done that. And I know I'm a new member, but there's all kinds of lobbyist activity. There's all kinds of networking. And you have people saying, oh, yeah, I'm buddies with Pierre Poilievre, and anybody, any member of this House, and to try to leverage their position in negotiating something. And that's not far-fetched. I think something like that is happening. So, if you look at, other engagement opportunities and partners, and I think Madame Shanahan showed an example of this earlier today. We've seen certain businesses ultimately be called in to and revoke their whatever contracts that they've had, or maybe even whatever status they're trying to use to try to obtain some of these contracts. So I just feel that to Mr. Barrett's original motion, I think it would be, and I know the members in the Mighty Ogo might not be too happy if we look at this study going over there, but it's maybe a possibility where something like this could go into that direction to sort of see, what led Mr. Anderson to try and apply for something that he may not be credited for. So I just wanted to maybe try to see if there's some opportunity to cooperate and get to some type of a different way forward and move this discussion forward. So I'll leave my thoughts there. I may come back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baines. Ms. Shanahan, go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to, because Mr. Green brought up quite a salacious story there. So I just wanted to bring up something that in that article, I believe it is the same Global News article, that it states there clearly that Global News found no direct tie between Boissonnault and Leblanc. You mentioned the member mentioned, Chair, another name, Arsenault, but maybe that was a misspoke, a misspeak.
I think it was a mishearing.
A misspeak, I think. I thought I heard Arsenault, and you were rhyming them off there. But that the Mr. Boissonnault came out with a statement as well that he has no knowledge of this person and so on and so forth. But I do believe that Mr. Green's point about the relevance of this is well taken, that it's not relevant. I don't think we're here to, start accusing people simply by association. If that was the case, anybody that had any friend in school or whatever. Anyway, Chair, I'm just going to leave that there. But yeah, for anybody who wants to see it, I found the article looking up Anderson and cocaine.
No, I have one on the list.
Yeah, and I believe I have Ms. Khalid next, followed by Mr. Green.
Chair, I'll relinquish my time to Mr. Green. I do love to hear what he has to say, always.
Mr. Green, go ahead.
Thank you. In the same story, after the editor's note, which was referenced by Ms. Shanahan, it says Global News has not independently verified this claim. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. I have nobody else on the list. So I'm going to, we're on the motion as proposed by Mr. Barrett. We are going to, do we have unanimous consent?
And I think it's probably going to be a recorded vote, right?
This will be a recorded vote, but I do have Mr. Villemure. Okay, good. Madam Clerk, I'm assuming we don't have unanimous consent, or do we? Okay. So I'm going to call the vote, recorded vote. Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The vote is on the motion as moved by Mr. Barrett. Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Fisher.
No.
Mr. Housefather.
No.
Ms. Khalid.
No.
Ms. Shanahan.
No.
Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
Mr. Majumdar.
Oui.
Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Monsieur Villemure.
Oui.
Mr. Green.
Je vote oui aussi.
Yeas 5 and nays 5.
I vote yes, Madam Clerk. Shocked. So the motion passed by Mr. Barrett carries. I'm going to go to Ms. Khalid now. Go ahead. Mr. Villemure, to correct? Okay. Ms. Khalid, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Although I had intended to move a motion today, I think I will leave that for another day. What I would really like to see from you, Chair, is what our work plan is for the rest of the year. I'm not sure if you could maybe outline it today as to what we're expecting, what we're anticipating until the end of the year and then into the new year, or if you want to send us perhaps a digital copy of your working calendar that you're working with the clerk on. But I think that would be really helpful for all of us in this committee to be able to gauge and schedule accordingly.
I appreciate that, and we did schedule some committee meetings and subcommittee meetings to work out a schedule. But you recall back in April or May, you'll recall back in April or May we had situations where we didn't get much done in the way of committee business. So I can certainly share with the committee, as I did at the top of the meeting, what the game plan is for the week of the 19th, who we've got coming in. We're still waiting to hear from the minister on the CRA study, but the study that was adopted by the committee, or the study on disinformation and misinformation, is something that the analysts are working on, and maybe I can get a better sense, maybe from Maxime or Alexandra, where we're at on the disinformation and misinformation study in terms of timelines, okay? So, because I know we've had some conversations about that as well. Not to put you on the spot, but if you can share with the committee some of that information.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's being drafted right now, as fast as we can, and the scheduled dates are distribution to the committee members on December 19th. 11th. December 11th.
Okay, so we will have to schedule some meetings before the House rises for the winter break in order to ensure that we deal with that report. As you can imagine, it's going to be a fairly lengthy report. We had quite a few witnesses over several meetings, so that's the work plan. We've got, as I said, the CRA motion, now the adoption of this motion, so that should take us at least for the next 2 or 3 weeks. But we'll. What's that?
This motion is going to.
No, there's 2 motions that we're dealing with: the CRA motion and then this motion that was passed today. So I will work with the clerk to get a work plan out to committee members, hopefully by early next week. Okay, but when we come back on the 19th and the 21st, we will be dealing with the CRA issue. Monsieur Villemure.
Monsieur le Président. Écoutez, pour le
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would like to let the members of the committee know that we are intending to move a motion. I will not do it today, but this motion will have to do with the study that we have just completed on TikTok. This will be a new motion because when we were doing the study, we delayed it for a while because there was an investigation by CSIS and by the RCMP. But then we kept going, and then we adopted the report. I don't know if the colleagues would want to go back, but there were some elements of information that led the minister to ban TikTok Canada, their offices at least here in Canada. So that is something that we have to take into account, this decision, because it directly impacts the protection of people's information. So if that is the case, the commissioner will not be able to not launch investigations, but will do what is necessary about an entity that will no longer be in this country. So this is a major development and information we did not have last week. So I believe we have to look into it and take that into consideration. When I read the news last night, I was really shocked because beyond national security considerations, which I take and accept, one of the ramifications is that we will lose oversight. So I am going to move a motion during the next meeting because today we didn't really have the time. So that's it. Thank you. If you want to do that, Mr. Villemure. We don't have other committee business, so I believe you will need to do that 48 hours before a meeting. The notice of motion, you would need to file that with the clerk. That will be the best course for that.
Thank you, Chair. Just on, firstly, on Mr. Villemur's highlighting of this issue, I know that you haven't tabled the report yet, correct?
No, I have not.
So maybe we can just add an addendum or a paragraph in that report and just not have to.
It's a little more complicated than that, just given the fact that we have already adopted the report. So
if there's unanimous consent in this committee, I'm sure we can add a paragraph to it.
Okay, but je pense que
I think the motion that Mr. Villemur will put on a notice is for another study. I don't want to speak on your behalf.
Thing. Okay, so I think that's what Mr. Villemur was talking about.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
100% agree and appreciate. Thank you, Mr. Villemur. Second point, Chair, is where's my Uber study?
What study?
My my delivery services study. I'm just wondering if we're going to get to it this year.